Good morning. My name is Rachel Shield. I'm the Director of Engagement here at Westminster Presbyterian Church, and we're so glad you're joining us for this session of adult education. Many of you will be joining us on a Sunday morning, and some of you will see us later. We're really excited to learn together this summer, and we have today two folks with us who are going to join this conversation. One is our very own Matt Llewellyn-Otten, who is the Director of Youth Ministries here at Westminster, and the other is Courtney Goto, who was a professor of Matt's, and so we have a connection to her through Matt, which is really fun. Dr. Courtney Goto is Associate Professor of Religious Education and co-director of the Center for Practical Theology at Boston University's School of Theology. Dr. Goto's research interests include intersections of racism, culture, and faith, as well as aesthetic teaching and learning, creativity, and embodied knowing. Her most recent work is called Taking on Practical Theology, the Idolization of Context and the Hope of Community, in which she examines power and privilege and knowledge production in the field of practical theology from her perspective as a Japanese American. She is also author of The Grace of Playing, Pedagogies for Leaning into God's New Creation, a book inspired by experiments with teaching and her mother's sanctuary art. Thank you so much for being here, Courtney. Hello again. Courtney and Matt and I had so much fun in our initial conversation around playing with the sacred. We thought we would continue the conversation a little bit longer and do some Q&A with Courtney. Dr. Courtney Goto has used objects as a means of understanding how and why we play with the sacred at church. And she invited us to reflect on objects that were sacred to us, and then shared about how we can, as a community, use play to seek the God of the unexpected, to create conditions for play that also allow others to share and enter and establish patterns of play or circumstances of play with us as a community, how we can lean into new things while being held and decenter learners as we do that. So there was a lot of great, there was just really rich content, and we wanted to go a little deeper into it. So we welcome you back to the conversation and look forward to seeing where this goes. Matt is with us as well. Matt is the Director of Youth Ministries here at Westminster, and so we will talk together for just a little longer. Thanks for being so generous with your time, Courtney. I really appreciate allowing us to go a little longer with our time together today.
My pleasure. So great to be with you and to have this conversation.
One of the things that sort of immediately came to mind for me is how, in your experience, what have you seen as common factors that allow communities to gain comfort, or maybe even to just establish patterns of leaning into new things, kind of maybe being off center a little bit. It's usually not comfortable for a lot of us to feel a little off center. Have you noticed that there are any things that communities do that do that in common?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rachel. I think that one of the, maybe a wise strategy to follow would be to think about what are the ways in which the church is naturally experiencing play already. And where are people feeling most creative and spontaneous? Where is spirit moving and in ways that people are generative, they feel they're glad to be alive and be together, and to look at clues about what that says about how people play. And later in the book, and this comes in the chapter that includes my mom's work about playing aesthetically, is that churches have styles of playing. And I talk about in terms of local, practical, theological aesthetics. That's a style of a kind of preferred way of encountering spirit aesthetically. So you might think, for example, if music is a really important part of the culture of Westminster, and that's a place where people naturally gravitate toward and feel spontaneous with each other, they feel authentic. Or if the church is a foodie church, like food is like the most important thing, is making food, sharing food, gathering, giving food away. So I think every church is a little bit different. But to know kind of where is your comfort zone with playing allows you then to say, this is our strength, and this is our personality. And then to work at the edges of, oh, okay, this is sort of our comfort zone. Can we play at the edges here about, oh, if we not go way out so much, but just a little bit of like, oh, a little stretch here. What would be a little stretch that might be connected to our comfort zone, but might be an interesting way of playing and trying out some new things. And so I think that it's the dance at the edge. I think that is helpful to manage it, both possibility and risk, but to know that there is a long history there to mine that wisdom that's already in the community.
Yeah, and when I'm thinking of that kind of that stretching, I'm thinking of the ways that learning happens through that kind of stretching and that playing. And especially since, as you mentioned before, our church has really made a commitment to being anti-racist and doing that work. And so I'm wondering, that really made me think of the ways that way that we play already, leading to the ways that we can continue to learn to be anti-racist. So I guess that's less of a question, but more of a wondering of, in your experience of play, the way that, racial justice and social justice comes into play. I'm wondering in what ways this kind of stretching helps us to see those blind areas that we hadn't seen before.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so I also am a scholar of ignorance. So I do work on race and ignorance as well, and relating across race, and so no one likes to have their ignorance exposed. None of us do. That's a really hard thing. So playing is a kind of indirect way of how do we do this in a way that makes things doable in a kind of more creative way, if it's indirect. And in some ways that might be it might be more effective. So one of the analogies that I have received from a body of work called Interplay, which is based in Oakland, California, I learned that sometimes we try to change things by going at it directly, but actually when things are stuck and entrenched, it's actually more helpful to find a more creative kind of backdoor way. Maybe at the same time, but that we rely on creativity to shake things up enough to create openings for our imagination, for relationship to grow, for spirit to enter, for things to be dislodged in helpful ways. That we can. That's not so scary that everything goes to pieces, but that just moves. That helpfully helps us make a shift. I'm also wondering, I noticed that I don't know if the work on race is newer and less developed than the church's commitment to LGBTQ community stuff. But that might be some interesting an analogy to make there of like, we've made these steps as a church to embrace the queer community who are here and who are among us. And we've done that. We are still growing in that work and we're doing that well. But that can be like, oh, well, if we've done that here and that's been creative work, we also have the resources to be creative about race.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, we may need to have other people, other players who can help us do this work even better.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about conversations we've had as a community around the importance of vulnerability when it comes to doing anti-racist work. That if we can put ourselves in a place of being able to be really honest about where we still have room to learn or where we've messed up, and know that we need to kind of figure out a way to move forward, that can help us in becoming anti-racist. And I'm sort of seeing ways, and maybe it's just me, but I often feel vulnerable while I'm playing. And I think there are ways that I'm wondering if there are ways that play, a playful spirit, might help us to become more comfortable or less worried, less perfectionistic, less kind of at greater ease with being, oh, I fell, I made a mess. Anti-racist work is serious. And so we take it seriously, but I wonder if there's a way that we can get further sometimes if we find ways to laugh, to make a mess together. And maybe, I don't know, is it okay to be not serious sometimes about the messes that we make around racism? Or is that heretical? I don't know. I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think there's some people who do that really well. Like I'm thinking of my colleague, Dean Teddy Hickman Maynard, who teaches a course on white privilege, and he's African American, and he this is just his personality is to come at it with humor and making which can be a kind of humanizing mode and way of being, because everybody is super nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a real gift to be able to do, is how do you build community in a way that can sustain the work. And sometimes like just finding ways to be human together. That's not to downplay the challenges and the hard work that's involved, but not to let that be the only thing that we do. So I think in some ways playing can also help build the community to be able to withstand hard work and harder work, and also to find creative ways to creative modes to play with hard things, even if it's artistically.
Yeah.
And that is not so much about, that can be of us playing with our stuff. So ways of coping with that kind of vulnerability, and building up a kind of tolerance for vulnerability is important, but also find creative ways where it doesn't have to be so directly about us or about you. It can be expressed in a third thing, and explored in a third thing can be helpful.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my time at Boston University with you. At the same time that I was taking your course, I was also in Dr. Salimi's The Prophetic Witness of Tupac Shakur. And so I was able to be in this course and talk about really, really hard and uncomfortable things that Tupac reflects about in his art and his music. And it was that third thing that helped to it led to some very uncomfortable conversations in the classroom, but it led to some really deep learning. So I'm kind of left with the question of, is play always serious? Or is play always joyful? Is it always fun? Because
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, is that still play if we're in there where, sometimes we leave in tears and sometimes we leave frustrated, and is that play?
Yeah.
Okay.
So by common sort of ordinary definitions, most people would say no.
Right.
Because people would judge it on how, was it a peak experience? Was it was it a kind of, did you get a high, a joyful kind of high from it? But I think that if we think about playing as a mode of relating in which realness and authenticity can be some of the gift, then the range of what we experience, whether it's joy or tears or real anger, could be understood in terms of playing, especially if as it turns to the work of repair, and that it doesn't stay sort of broken, but that playing is in the fluidity of our relating.
Yeah, it's kind of comforting to know that play isn't always joyful. It's about the relation, not just between myself and that piece, but how we all interact with that piece, and we can walk away with it with an experience that's soul stirring, but in a soul stirring way that is decentering.
Yeah, I think that even just reframing some experience as, and wondering if it is playing, could itself be decentering and potentially liberative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's worth thinking about. Because the tendency, of course, is when you get into these tense conversations, especially around race, is to just say, I know exactly what that was. It was X. And in our relating to one another, that kind of, if that stops the relating, then that's not playing. So how do we? The playing is in the fluidity of the back and forth, and the possibility of moving into a new place together, where new possibilities can emerge.
Yeah, and there's such grace in that too, of showing grace towards one another, and so that fluidity isn't broken.
Yeah,
and that it never becomes beyond repair, because there is grace, and in grace there's spirit. That's really beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I think that in playing there's a kind of, some people call it the sort of back and forth, and there's this, that's the fluidity, that's another way of talking about fluidity, but kind of elasticity. Instead of just like rupture and everything shatters, but there's elasticity of like, we're still, we can be stretched, we can go to, but we can also like, there can be repair, and there can be no new openness. We can go somewhere new.
That sounds like resilience.
Yeah, that is related.
Matt, you were talking about the class that you took about Tupac and the prophetic, and it reminded me of a statement that Courtney made that I thought about as an artist, but also just in sort of wondering about what is unique about the church and its ability to acknowledge the possibility that you said play is about as if, that there are possibilities that extend beyond appearance, that the world sends messages, and I think there's like that's a spiritual concept, and something that I hope that the church kind of holds as a unique identifier, maybe, or communities of faith. We share that kind of way of relating to the world. And I'm wondering if you have kind of is there more to know about the prophetic and play? Are there connections there to explore? Have you encountered those in your work?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking that. I mean, I think that these are new edges for my own work. So my work on play originally began with researching playing, and then I was doing critical work on race. And so now it's sort of like I'm sort of coming back and interweaving these things more and more. Although the work that I've been doing on playing, because it was inspired in part by Mom's work. And Mom's work was partly inspired by her experiences of racism, including being interned during World War II among the over 120,000 Japanese who were interned during the war. That her creativity is partly a response of a strategy of if we are faced with ways of being in society that are unhealthy, how do we creatively respond to that? And so that's where, the playing and the prophetic, I think, are deeply connected. Is that if playing and creativity are so connected, and as well as with authenticity, that it pushes us as communities into new places, and that playing is itself and can be subversive, which is where the prophetic comes in. So the question is how do you manage and be strategic about using the creative prophetic edge of playing? Both for our own transformation and for the transformation of the world.
Wow.
That's intense. Profound, really. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
I'm wondering now, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about ways that creativity, poetry, that music has brought me into a space where I could learn and experience new things that I might not, that like a teaching might not have done, but that it was kind of entering into a space, like I was open to prophetic words because I was in this different kind of a space. And especially like as a young person, I'm realizing that may have been some of where I learned to think differently about my place in the world and explore other people's perspectives about their place in the world and begin to think more with a greater sense of openness. So
yeah, Moltmann uses the word counter environments. It's not his originally. He cites McLuhan, but that's a helpful concept to think of how like poetry or music creates a counter environment in which we try on new possibilities, and those possibilities can be prophetic and help us imagine what we can't, something that is not in our habit of embodying. So I want to share an activity with you, Matt, since you're working with young people.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of work that I write about in a separate article that's sort of an addition to Grace of Playing, and it's on teaching love through clowning. And I don't use the rubric of playing in that particular article because it's a ton to explain. But I use the fourfold analysis that I use in the book.
Okay.
But I wanted to share with you just this idea of clowning is creating a kind of counter environment for learners that you might want to consider trying with your young people. I'm going to be doing this probably again in August with my students for creative pedagogy. But in putting in becoming a clown, and it could be as simple as just like donning a red nose, in a costume, or putting on the white grease paint.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it can be a really interesting experience of allowing yourself to be othered, of giving up privilege, because and that can be a really interesting temporary experience for young people, and to have the support of one another. So being held is important. And holding on to, so they're holding on to, like, this is a costume, and knowing there's boundaries, like this is going to be temporary, this is structured, we've taken some steps to build up to this was, so this is doable. But also experimenting of, what is it like to be out in public spontaneously, allowing people to react to me in a way that I am othered.
Yeah.
And what does that mean, like, for people who are chronically othered in a way that I'm not used to being othered?
Yeah, it comes into that idea of, I don't know, I'm really interested to read this, but sometimes clowns are seen as this joyful thing that bring such joy to things, but then there's other people who are like, I'm really afraid of clowns. Yeah, like I'm not afraid of clowns, but other people are like, oh gosh, clowns. But there are like some kind of extreme visceral reactions to this one thing, and that's because of the culture has created that type of thing. But there's, in the 1990s, there's like the whole killer clown thing or whatever, so like these kind of ideas have been perpetuated, but there is the clown was supposed to be a thing of joy and a thing of entertainment. And yeah, I'm really interested to read more about this. That sounds really cool. But this idea of kind of othering, of kind of being able to step into the clown shoes, and
yeah, I mean, so birthday clowns are kind of like, the image is the happy clown, but
mm-hmm.
but there's a long tradition that I write about in the book about fools being subversive figures,
yes,
and being prophetic figures. So it's interesting for young people to try that on. What is it like to be to commit to being, at least for this particular short amount of time, being subversive?
Yeah, and I think with that young generation, we see this Gen Z becoming more socially active, and so I know a lot of my kids have participated in the uprising here, and the cries for social justice, have been there with the bullhorns and leading others in the march, and also allowing space for others to lead in the march. But that there is this as you were talking, I kind of had the idea of uprising as play too, in some way, that we are rallying behind something, and in this Gen Z, we see a great way that they are relating to one another through these modes of advocacy, and they're mobilizing themselves and using social media to even further perpetuate their cause. We saw that so much in Ferguson, but now we're seeing this new generation use social media in different ways of learning, perpetuating ideas. And once again, you're interacting with the third thing that is helps to stimulate this conversation and to increase increase their own advocacy and be subversive in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great connection, to think about the creativity of social protest, and linking it to playing. And because you're right, there's all kinds of relationships being revealed in the making of them, and people extending their own sense of agency and creativity in ways that they would not have expected, by doing it together, by vibing off of each other, and finding new ways to further the cause.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just, I've seen that it's just the learning and having those really hard conversations, and other times it's them in the streets, doing that really hard work and being threatened, and they're beginning to lead the way in this kind of subversive type of thing, and this subversive way of being, and it being prophetic. And it truly is astounding to see the ways that they are prophets.
Amen.
I'm curious about, as we're thinking of, like, you're talking about acting a part, or playing the fool. But we know this has happened in different cultures in different ways. Putting on costume, and there are cultural elements that come into play when we're kind of doing some of these activities. I was, thinking even just of the way that, like, when I was a teenager, like belting out a song in a car, words that are not my own, an experience that is not my own, but like entering into that in a way that sparked my imagination. And kind of, I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to, how do we think about doing that in a way that is appreciative and not appropriating? Like, are there limits, boundaries? Are there ways we can be aware of, this is the way we're being invited into this kind of play? It might have certain cultural components to it, and appreciating it and not appropriating it as we're learning from other groups of people and carrying on, what we've learned into new environments. Do you have any, I don't know, I guess either Matt or Courtney, have you thought about, is there work done there? Are there things to think about as we're doing that kind of play?
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughtful question, and also a real caution in recognizing the possible risks of being creative in the name of playing, and it being liberative for some, only to realize that it's not liberating at all for others. I think it underscores the importance of relating across difference, and because we can't know, that we need the help of other people to develop and to really listen to other people who are coming from very different experiences than we are, that hopefully, through multiple perspectives, that you get greater wisdom, and it's not by just being with the same people that you get that kind of wisdom. So yeah, I think that's something to be wary of, and always wary of one's own passion and enthusiasm, because it can easily happen.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the interplay between storytelling and play, of play being a way of storytelling, because Rachel, when we showed our objects, this was, and Courtney, when you shared it, that was storytelling, and that tells me something really deeply personal about each of you, something that I didn't know, and storytelling is such a beautiful way of opening a conversation and realizing the ways that our play might be disruptive to others, or yeah, I just see those kind of resonances between play and storytelling so much. And
yeah, I think stories are a natural vehicle for relating. In Hawaiian tradition, the pidgin word for it is talk story, and it's a way of not just being but relating, and that there is a kind of authenticity and spontaneity to that is natural and that builds relationship, and creates an opportunity to say what is real, to be in charge of how much you share or don't share, or how you craft the story. And it's inherently a creative act to offer that, and sometimes offer that on the fly. Yeah.
There's lots to think about. I'm feeling really grateful for, I feel like there's just a lot here I haven't thought about yet. So I'm grateful for you bringing it to the table and letting us as a community kind of process that food for thought, digest it, and I'm looking forward to the ways that it yields fruit in our community moving forward. So
can I ask you, what do you hope for your community in terms of playing?
Yeah, I am hoping it stirs new things into being, that it shakes things up just a little bit, that it creates spaces where the unexpected can happen, and in particular where relationships are built. So I had mentioned intergenerational play before. I know I'm relatively new to the community. I've only been working at Westminster for about a year, but I've heard many people say that they would like to see more intergenerational community built, and so that's a big thing. And the other, I think the other hope is that we would maybe in playing learn to be a little less perfectionistic, maybe a little more spontaneous, maybe a little more open to the way that the Spirit leads, sometimes through vulnerability, through our discomfort, and that we become more comfortable with discomfort. And creativity. We are a creative community. That's one of the reasons I love Westminster. There is a lot of art and music that gets made, and I'm hoping we'll be able to create art and music together at many different levels. There's a lot of people that are professional musicians that are part of our community, but there are many people who are amateurs, and I'd love to see more of all of that kind of recreating as well. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, for me, one way that I keep thinking about it, and you touched on it earlier, Courtney, is this succession of legacy of the ways that intergenerational play can lead to kind of the ways in which the stories and the impact that one generation can have on the next, or even just that one person can have on the next, leads to something that perpetuates through their whole life, something that resonates throughout their whole life. And I reflect upon the people, specifically the strong women in my life, and the ways that they helped to build my faith, to form my faith throughout my life. And that really feeds into my own vocation, and the ways that people saw something that I never knew about myself, or really pushed me towards something. And so there's like this generational thing happening here of legacy and succession happening that really resonates with me. That's a hope of mine. And then you mentioned earlier also this playing by ourselves, but like we never play by ourselves. We're always playing with those people who taught us to play. in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so during this time of quarantine, I've been doing a lot of yoga, and I think about my own yoga teachers who taught me to do yoga and the community that I was a part of as I was doing yoga with these other people, and the way that I'm connected to the people that are doing yoga with me virtually through this one teacher, through a teacher on our laptops and or our TVs or whatever. Like we're all still connected, and I'm doing this work. I'm doing this yoga in my own house, but I'm reflecting on those who have taught me, and so it's still that idea of this legacy type of work happening, of it kind of being able to open something new within ourselves. And some people never see themselves as teachers, but by playing we teach, and that's a deep hope of mine.
Courtney, do you think we lost a heritage that, as you're talking about your grandmother, an inheritance, or your mom, inheritance as her daughter to do creative work? I mean, I immediately thought of God, the inheritance God gives us as God's children to do creative work, and how many of the places I have been in church are serious and kind of rigid. I come from a very rigid church tradition, lots of rules, and I'm wondering, what happened? Is that, did we lose something? Did we forget something? Does it exist in a more alive way in other communities that we can learn from? How do we regain that inheritance? Or rediscover it?
So one question I have is maybe what doesn't look like playing to you may be playing to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for some people, it's like the words and the rules and the seriousness is really where they become alive.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that's also like been privileged in ways, and sort of expected and become part of a culture in ways that don't feel life-giving to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe someone like you who was like, whoa, what happened here?
Mm-hmm.
We're missing something. And that may be a longing for a wider range of ways of playing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's necessarily like, this church doesn't have it, but this church has, because playing is so particular to every community. The question is how alive, and what's, are there deep relationships that allow the kind of creating to be ever unfolding in whatever shape and form that takes. Now, if there's not, then that's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much like how that doesn't appear in this particular form.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The spirit as life-giving, play as life-giving. There's sort of this, there's some theology there, around what gives life, what is death, and how is our theology marked by the life-givingness of it.
Yeah, I will say though, that being, Western Christianity's preoccupation with kind of logocentric, word, only words, and being really in our heads isn't conducive for a wider range of ways of knowing, and the creativity that comes with other alternative ways of knowing. So that kind of forecloses a lot of possibilities when you're only so wed to certain ways and privileging certain ways of knowing.
Wow.
Reading, writing, speaking texts.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Not that playing doesn't happen within those forms, they do. But I'm saying a kind of burgeoning or a breaking out of or expansion.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. That's an important point. Thank you. Yeah. Matt, do you have anything else?
Just lots and lots of gratitude for you, Dr. Goto. I have reflected upon the things that I've learned from you and for years now, and I carry them with me often, and I reflect on that class all the time and the ways that you have taught me, and now this is such an unbelievable gift to be here with you. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you so much. And really to both of you for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate this extra conversation, and I can't wait to sleep on it, because I feel like there's all this stuff brewing I haven't even become fully conscious of. So thank you for your time. And
well, I am inspired by your leadership. I wish you the grace of playing. May you be blessed by Spirit in the many ways that you hope, and even some unexpected ones that are life-giving. And I hope this series goes really well, and I hope you'll let me know.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. Thanks.